We're going to continue today with our second lecture on Merleau-Ponty. The last lecture we looked at the Merleau-Ponty and the Phenomenology of the body, specifically focusing on the difference between the body construed as an object and the experience of the body as we live it. Today I want to continue with something very much in that same line. Today I want to talk about time and space and basically bring out the same kind of distinction, the difference between time and space as we experience them objectively, and the difference between that and the way we live our temporal and spatial existence. To get into that, I just wanted to go back and think about the body just for a moment. And the point we really got to was thinking about the body as the I can, right? My experience of being able to engage with the world. And so the body, in that sense, is the site where my subjectivity and reality merge. So the body is the site of action. But notice too that action is not something that might or might not happen. For the moment, I'm using action in a pretty generic and loose sense. I probably will distinguish a more narrow sense of action in a moment. But for right now, I just mean action in a very loose sense, just a very, very loose sense of doing. In that loose sense, action is not something that might or might not happen. Right? You are always acting, just like you are always experiencing. You are always actively interacting with the world, even if it's in a very minimal way. So that's an interesting thought, right? The sort of the permanence within your experience of the flow of experience, and the permanence within your experience of your own acting, and they're the same thing, right? Or they're two ways of looking at the same reality. Yesterday we read a little bit last time we read a little bit from the chapter on the experience of the body in classical psychology, where Merleau-Ponty talks about the sort of perceptual presence of a little bit of your body and the kind of necessity and invariance that has, and why that invariance can't be understood simply as a factual matter, precisely because it's necessary within your experience. And we could say something similar here then, just about action, and about for lack of a better expression, it's not a great expression, but it'll do for the moment, the flowing of experience, the continuous ongoing character of the happening of your experience. Those things in their analogous necessity are similarly then not optional empirical developments. Like they're constitutive of the very form of the happening of experience. So that's just a thing for you to start thinking about, just for a little bit of context. But anyway, thinking about action, thinking about what it is for you to act. To act is always going to be to introduce some kind of change, right? To make it be the case that it's going to be this as opposed to something else it might have been. And so, and it's going to be something brought about by you as a body in the world. So think about that for a moment, and you can see that space and time are always going to be the parameters of action, right? The change is always going to happen through time. It's going to be a change from now until then, and it's going to happen in a spatial context, right? So space and time, just sort of thinking loosely, just to get into it, space and time are kind of the parameters of all our action. And so the things that we're going to say about action, or the things that we're going to say about experience, are always going to have spatial and temporal sense. So that there's something for you just to start thinking about. Anyway, like I said, I want the thing I want to focus on is the difference between time and space construed as the structures of objects, an objective sense of them, versus time and space as we live them. And basically the thing that I'm going to be driving at, again, analogous to the distinction between the actual body and the habitual body, or the body at this moment and the habit body that we talked about last time. Analogously to that, I want to distinguish between that objective experience of time and space. Well, I want to distinguish between that and the lived experience. And what I want to be able to show is that that objective experience, in a fundamental way, always rests on and is contextualized by a lived experience of time and space that has quite a different character and quite a different significance than that objective one. So that's overall what we're going to do. And I want to start with the theme of time. And I think I'll start with that passage that I quoted from the introduction to part 1. I think it was on page 71. Yeah. Or is it? Hold on. Sorry, no, it's on 73. About 2/3 of the way down the page on 73. Merleau-Ponty says, "My present, which is my point of view upon time, becomes one moment of time among others." Sorry, I should have read the part of the sentence before that. "Likewise, I treat my own perceptual history as a result of my relations with the objective world, and my present, which is my point of view upon time, becomes one moment of time among others." So remember, the thing I was talking about yesterday is that we typically construe things on the basis of our objective sense of things, and that turns out to be a problem. And so the thing he's saying here is we do that with the sense of time. So he's saying my present time, we think of that as just one time among others. It's my present time is 2:15 p.m. or something like that, whatever it is, right? We imagine time as this sort of objectively measurable thing. And we say, oh, here's my present. It's this one time in relationship to all those other objective times, right? We categorize our lived now in relationship to and in the terms of our sense of time as a measure of objects, as objective time. So the thing that's implied in his remark there is that there's a different way of thinking of time, right? So he says, "My present, which is my point of view upon time, becomes one moment of time among others." So it's that contrast is the thing he's getting at. We come to think of it as just one moment of time among others, but what it really is my point of view upon time. Right? So I want you to start thinking about that and go back to his initial word, my present. Right? We have a word for that. When is my present? Well, my present is now. So now is a pretty interesting notion, right? Like I said before that you're always acting, right? And I compared that to the way this is visually always present in your perception. The thing he says in the classical psychology chapter. Well, notice that now is like that too. Notice the remarkable thing that the now of your experience has in a fundamental way never changed. Right? Let me read you a passage where I hope I can find it. It's in the Cogito chapter. I think it's going to be here. Yeah, so think about birth. He says, this is on page 429, about halfway down the page. He's talking about birth. Your birth, my birth. One day, and indeed once and for all, something was set in motion that, even during sleep, can no longer cease seeing or not seeing, sensing or not sensing, suffering or being happy, thinking or resting. In a word, that can no longer cease having it out with the world. Right? And then about 6 lines down from that, 5 lines down, the event of my birth has not passed away. And then at the very bottom of that page, 3 lines up from the bottom, my first perception along with the horizons that surrounded it, is an ever-present event. This is the weird notion, right? That the weird thing for you to think about. Weird only if you've never thought about it before. Now, the now, when you say now, sometimes you think of it's like, oh, now, right now, and you try to snap your fingers. But now usually means, what I'm doing right now. Like I'm recording a lecture, so now is like today. Or you say now during the COVID-19 pandemic, or now, and it can, or now today, whatever it is. But it can stretch out, right? But there is a basic way in which now, for each of us, now always has a kind of an absolute meaning, right? And it stretches out to your birth, right? The now is the time of your experiencing. And as he says, like that got started and it hasn't stopped yet. You are in the same experience of being present to the happening of reality, the happening of experience that has been going on all along, right? It's never stopped. You never left it. You never got somewhere else. So the now is when you are happening, and that has been going on for you this whole time. So my present is really when I am present, and the now of my presence thus in a way stretches out through the whole historical expanse of my existing. It's been that same event that never stopped. And that present is weirdly open because it's going to go on until I die. You don't know when that's going to be. And just like your birth, you're not exactly going to be there to experience it. It's not going to be an event in experience. The one is the experience starting. So that's not something that happens in experience. It's quite inconceivable. And the other one is going to be the end of experience, but it's not going to be an event in experience. It's going to be experience at that point will have already stopped, right? So those endpoints are oddly ungraspable of us, even though we can conceptually note them. They're ungraspable by us. But they are also integral to the very meaning of now, which also means that our now has this weird sort of unsealed character to it. Unsealed actually probably means the opposite of in English to what I'm trying to mean. I mean, you can't seal it up, so it's kind of mysterious. Whereas when people say something is unsealed, they often mean the mystery has been revealed. So let me pick a different term. There's a kind of open-endedness at both ends. And hence a kind of opacity to our experience. And so the now is always still grappling with that birth, and it's always already grappling with that death, even though neither of them can ever be really made present and resolved. So in fact, let me read another thing. This is the very end of the chapter on other selves in the human world. Let me just find it. Yeah, it's on pages 381 and 382. I'll read this whole little paragraph. You're describing what it's like to be an experiencing subject. Established within life, propped up by my thinking nature, placed within that transcendental field that opened with my first perception, and in which every absence is merely the other side of a presence, or every silence and modality of sonorous being, I have a sort of theoretical ubiquity and eternity. I feel destined to a flow of inexhaustible life, whose beginning and whose end I cannot think, since it is still my living self who thinks them. And since thus, well, he even says thus, I thought I was going to add that, and since thus, my life always precedes itself and always survives itself. You can go back and puzzle over that sentence. Some of the details of it would make more sense if you read the surrounding material. But he's talking about the weird way that you can't conceive of your own absence. Or you can conceive of it in the sense that you can utter that sentence. You can't existentially grasp your own absence, because the very meaning of absence for you is always, this paper that was here. I can chuck it up, crumple it up, and throw it away, and then it's absent. The absence is the other side of a presence, and they're kind of options. To be present or to be absent are options within your experience, but that doesn't make sense for your experience as a whole, because like the same things we've been saying about necessity and about those other things, the body and so on, the presence of you to your experience is integral to the very meaning of experiencing. And so it doesn't make any sense within your experience to imagine or construe the absence of yourself, because that just would no longer be you experiencing. And that's why he says that consequently there's a kind of a quasi ubiquity or eternity or even immortality to our experience, in the sense that its very nature is that it can't really make sense of its own disappearance. And yet, does he say it here? Yeah, he says, and yet at the same time, in our experience, the very character of that living perspectival reality brings with it a kind of feeling of our contingency. That there is a kind of necessity to my presence that is constitutive of the very meaning of what it is to experience. And yet, the very finitude of my perspective brings with it kind of the opposite sense of my contingency, of the fact that I'm not absolute reality, that I'm not permanent. And so we have a sense of the contingency of our own life, and we can come to conceptually recognize that's related to our birth and death. But the meaning of that is in a way a permanent kind of enigma to us, an enigma that's pretty important for shaping the meaning of life. But it's permanently kind of enigmatic. The thing he's talking about there is largely what you would get in if you read Kierkegaard's book Concluding Unscientific Postscript. In the Concluding Unscientific Postscript, Kierkegaard has these brilliant little reflections on our existential condition, and one of the big ones is on the meaning of my death. I can't remember his exact words, how he puts it, but it's the experience of what it is to experience yourself as a being who can die, and it's really rich. And the experience of that existential grappling with our own death is at the core of our ability to basically hold ourselves answerable to the highest things. Grappling with our own death is in a way recognizing the uniqueness and inescapability of this one and only time as when matters of ultimate meaning are going to call upon me, and it's in that context that we can rise to owning up to our ability to be bearers of ultimate meaning and so on. Anyway, that's the kind of thing Kierkegaard talks about in Concluding Unscientific Postscript quite brilliantly, obviously. And that's what Merleau-Ponty is picking up on here. Heidegger does the same thing in Being and Time when he talks about what he calls being towards death and anxiety and so on. Very similar set of themes. Merleau-Ponty doesn't really particularly pursue that in great detail, but he sort of alludes to it here and there and drops out a few things, and that's what you could think of here. Anyway, I'm not going to pursue that here. I do intend to come back to that a little bit at the end, but I really just wanted to bring that up. And the goal of there was to really just to get you to start thinking phenomenologically about your experience of time, and specifically phenomenologically about your experience of now. And I'm trying to get you to break out of the really dull habit of treating now as, the second on the clock, and to think about the the weird uniqueness of the experience of now. Like, that's what it is to be a subject. You are the kind of thing who can experience now, and that's what it means to be a subject, is to have a temporal existence. It's to have the experience that now it's happening. Right? And that's part of the meaning of a perspective. A perspective is happening now. It's not an eternal grasp of eternal truth. It is being now at the moment when an engagement with the world, my subjectivity with the world, is happening. But that now, so that's the one thing about now, but it's also a now that endures, but it endures between these contingent ends, contingent in the sense that they answer to nothing else, and they define the very necessity of your perspective, namely your birth and your death, and they are inherently therefore opaque to you also. Anyway, I just want you to start thinking about that, about that. So to go back to that sentence then from page 73. When I level out my experience to something not very interesting by trying to construe experience on the model of the properties of the objects of my experience, then my present, which is my point of view upon time, becomes one moment of time among all others, right? And so what we're trying to do is think the opposite. Okay, what is my present? Which is also my presence. It's when I'm there, right? What is the real way to think about my point of view on time? So that's the first thing I wanted to bring out. I wanted you to start thinking about that sentence and the thing he's saying there. The second thing I want to do is to go back to the chapter we looked at last time about the phantom limb, the body as object and mechanistic physiology. And I want to now, I think we did roughly pages 80 to 82 or 80 to 84 last time. I want to do roughly pages 85 to 87 now, just because he talks about time there. And so he's going to talk about the temporality of habit, the temporality of repression. But I think it's basically the same as the temporality of habit. We talked about habit a bit last time, and you'll see the connection quickly enough. So he's talking here, talking about the phantom limb. It kind of naturally, he says, when people try to analyze the phantom limb, they think of it on the model of psychological repression, because it's a kind of denial of an injury and so on. And he talks a little bit about that and so on. That's what leads him now to talk about the temporality of repression. And temporality of repression he associates with issues of trauma, because it's when you encounter a certain kind of, when you're engaged in a kind of traumatic event or have a traumatic experience, that's the thing that gets repressed. And so he's going to talk about the temporality of that. That's what I want to speak about. So first let me say something just about trauma, or as I understand that, and then bring it into the text, and then try to open it up a little bit. What does it mean to call something traumatic? I mean, it means in a certain way something happened that you can't just digest, right? You can't just treat it as one more thing that happened today. You can't just treat it as, you can't just treat it as one now beside other nows. Maybe it's, an awful thing like the unexpected premature death of your daughter, or maybe it's horrible event of the way you were abusively treated by maybe your dad, maybe sexual abuse or something like that. Maybe it's something that happens in a context of war, or even maybe not war, maybe something more familiar and civil, but let's say war, but maybe a situation where you had to kill someone, or maybe an accidental one. Maybe you were driving down the street and you hit a little boy, hit a little girl. killed her. I mean, so I don't know, but like they're nasty things. You can think about what those things might be that might, as we say, be traumatizing. Maybe it was seeing your dad do something to your mom violently or something. It doesn't even have to be something that in that more direct sense happened to you or was done by you. It could be actually something you observe. But think about those kinds of things. In our familiar kind of everyday idiom, we say the things you can't get over. And that's, I think, the point. Traumatic events, normally you can get over everything, right? It rained today. When you get over it, it's not hard. You get over it as soon as the clock, wherever the clock is when the rain stops, that's when you got over it. That's kind of what time is kind of at the everyday objective level. Time is the getting over of things. This is happening and now it's not anymore, and you're over it and you're on to something else. And all those things that happened fit neatly into just the narrative of this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And they're all digestible. They're all the kinds of things that were supposed to happen. Even things that you didn't like that much, like you didn't get picked for the job you were applying for. It's irritating. But, you can get over it because it's the kind of thing you can recognize as one of the possibilities in the world that you were prepared to accept. Now, of course, there might be some people who don't get over that. And that's worth remembering too. Like you might spend the rest of your life stewing about that job you didn't get, or the girlfriend you didn't get to go out with. David Bowie has a song about that on the album Scary Monsters. I think that's what it's called. It's a song called Repetition. It seems like it's a song about a not very nice man who beats up his wife, and it seems like the song portrays that as him continuing to grapple with the fact that he, or at least to blame the fact that he didn't get to go out with the girl he wanted to in high school or something like that. Whether the song is a deeply insightful grasp of human psychology or not isn't the point. I mean, it's kind of interesting though. It's a great tune, but it does point to someone who's still hung up about something that happened when he was 17 or something like that. So hung up about, like, that's another expression we used, right? These are things we don't get over. We get hung up on them. So what's supposed to happen is the present moment is just supposed to flow nicely into the next moment, and then it's going to drift into the past, and what used to be the future is the new present, and then that one drifts into the past and turns into the new future, and so on. That just rolls along smoothly. And so the things we get hung up about, the things we can't get over, the things that are traumatizing, and there are degrees of intensity to all of those. When we say traumatizing, we actually mean the really intense ones, but those are all versions of the same thing. Those are things that don't just slot themselves into the flow of time. And so in a way, you were supposed to get over that, but it's like it hooked onto your shirt and you're still stuck there. Like, I can't get that off there, right? It's that moment of time that present refused to drift into the past. So according to the clock, it's now the past, but you are still there. That's when your life is still happening. And so that's what Merleau-Ponty refers to as the past that remains our true present. So he says, he's talking about a traumatic event, and he says, halfway down in 85, impersonal time continues to flow. The clock still works, and you can still read the clock. But personal time is arrested. When you are, I'll use a spatial metaphor and say where you are happening, but really I mean when you are happening. That's still, June 16th, 1998 at 3 p.m. when blah, 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 right? That's when you still are. Impersonal time continues to flow, but personal time is arrested. And then he says, this, 3 more lines down from that, this past that remains our true present does not move away from us, right? As in your vision of time as kind of a thing like this, it should have moved away, right? It does not move away from us, but what does it do? Well, he says, rather, in lieu of being displayed before our gaze, and this is the other thing, it's also something that you're, if it's really something repressed that he's talking about here, you're not specifically attending to it. It always hides behind it, our present. The traumatic thing you can't get over it, but also there's something so bad about it that you also don't want to look at it. So at some level you don't want to get over it because you don't accept to have to accept it. You don't want to live in a world where you've accepted that. It runs against everything about you to do that. And so your relationship to some factual historical occurrence in the objective world is one of more or less refusal. And yet, in another sense, it happened. And so you're in a bind. You're in a kind of contradictory situation of it happened and you refused it. And so that's that thing you're stuck up against and you can't digest. And that's the past that remains your true present, because that's now who you are. That is the thing your life is sort of circling around. Even though it's June, what did I say, June 22nd, 1998, or whatever I said. You can't get past that thing. So it's as if, as he says, personal time was arrested. Your clock stopped then. So at the level of lived time as we live it, you're starting to get a sense from that of the lived meaning of now. That's what I'm trying to conjure up for you. It kind of means what you're down with, what you're prepared to engage with. And you can see here that your lived sense of now can get hung up. There can be something you can't get through, and so you're just stuck there. And that sense of now is wrapped up with other things too. It's the now. It's in a way, it's the present, but it's got the past and the future built into it as well. Because the very sense of now is now when I'm doing my thing, and doing your thing means having things you're working towards, having things on your mind, having things you're going towards, and having things you've done, right? And so the very way you live now, both normally and I think always, but let's say normally first, the very way you live now is your experience of how you stand with respect to where you're going and where you've come from, right? That's I always love this. In two of Plato's dialogues, the Phaedrus and I think the Lysis, they more or less begin with either somebody asking Socrates or Socrates asking the other. I think it might be one of each even. I think in the Lysis somebody asks Socrates, and I think in the Phaedrus Socrates asks Phaedrus? Whoever he's talking to, it must be Phaedrus. Where from and where to? Where are you coming from and where you're going? And that has the prosaic sense, like I'm walking here and I was there, but it also has the deeper existential sense, like where are you going in your life and where are you coming from, right? And so your sense of now has always got that where from and where to built into it. Whenever now is for you, that now always has a where are you going on its horizon, and it's also got on a sort of back horizon, where have you been? And you know, those questions of where you're going operate at many levels. As I just said, sometimes you're just going to the store, but you're going to the store in the context of starting a new romantic relationship or ending an old one, or maybe even put that a little bit one step before that. You're going to the store, but you're doing that in the context of trying to make dinner, and you're doing that in the context of a busy day, and you're doing that in the context of starting or ending a relationship with someone, and you're doing that in the context of blah blah blah, right? Every one of those things is a possible way of talking about what the relevant future is, and it would have a relevant past, and those are different ways of saying what now is. And so the way you live now has always got that packed, that sort of nested set of trajectories and meanings built into it, and at different moments different levels of that are salient. And so the thing is, in the trauma case, the kind of trivial things like going to the store and getting milk, you're still doing that, but something about a deeper thing you were involved in, the where to and where from, a deep one, got stalled. Like there was, something utterly non-optional about your relationship with your mom and your dad, or your relationship with your daughter, or something like that. Like you can't separate that from the very meaning of your life and the very meaning of who you are. And so the death of one of those people, or the horrible thing that was done to one of them, or whatever the situation is, the traumatizing event, the terrible thing they did to you, that can't fit with the where from and where to you're living from, insofar as your relationship with them is essential. And so that got stuck. That's the moment your life is stuck at. And even though these other lesser things like getting milk and so on still happen, and they have these trivial little futures and pasts, your future is a problem, because the future that is integral to the very way that you were living your present probably has become impossible because of that thing that happened. And those things can't be mixed. Yeah, so I won't go on about trauma, although it's such an important and interesting topic. It'd be nice to pursue it further. But anyway, this talk about time and this important sense of my present, that is my point of view on time, that Merleau-Ponty raises on page 73, is such a powerful entry point into those kinds of themes that I highly recommend this material to you if you want to think about those kinds of deep and rich sort of psychological and existential issues. But I want to move on a little bit just to talk a little bit more about this. So here we're talking about trauma and repression and so on. And I want to make that same point now at a much less threatening level. And by this, I do not in any way mean to belittle or diminish the importance of trauma. But I really want to just show that something like... So trauma seems like a bad thing that happened. But I want to show that the kind of issues of temporality that are alive there are actually also always alive in your experience, but in a much more presumably healthy and happy way. And so I want to say the temporality of repression and the temporality of habit are I think almost identical, at least with respect to the relevant point I'm going to make. And so the reason we might sometimes find that harder to see is because we aren't shocked enough by the fact that we can build habits. We were so used to doing it that we just think, yeah, of course we can. And you just ask yourself, how the hell does that happen? And it's amazing. Like, so I play the guitar, and I could go back years and years talking about this, but I could even talk about something I'm trying to do now. I'm trying to finger something. Maybe it's a song I've written and I'm trying to play it well, or maybe I'm just experimenting with some other thing I'm playing, and maybe I'm trying to play a certain thing faster or vary the way I'm articulating some of the notes or something. So I got my right hand picking and my left hand fingering the strings, and I do it and I make some errors, or I do it slowly or something, but I know if I just repeat it, it's going to get better. And I do that. Like, I practice it, and that's what we call practicing, right? And I do it over and over and over again, because I know that's the way to get better. And so this thing that initially I can't do very well, if this particular line I'm trying to play or something, imagine something relatively small. If I can't get it, if I practice it, maybe I'll just sit and practice it while I'm watching TV or something. In 15 minutes, I'll be able to do it. So what happened? Like, I conceptually knew what it was before and after. But what did I do? Like, I let my hands loose. I said, okay, guys, go to it. I said, do it now, okay? Do it now, okay? Do it. Will you pluck the strings for me, right hand? Will you finger the strings for me, left hand? And they do it, which is the weird thing about your body, that it automatically enacts your will, realizes your will for you. But it does it, and I say, okay, guys, learn how to do this well, please, because right now we can't do it, and I want to do it well. So will you just learn that? And they do. My fingers just run over these strings 25 times, and a thing they couldn't do before, suddenly they do. And from then on, it's smooth and easy. That's crazy. It's just crazy that can happen. Why on earth would you get better at doing that? Now, you might think it's obvious, but that's just because you're used to it happening. If you try to answer why, you're not going to find an answer. It's just baffling. Habit is the craziest thing. So like I like to think of habits like learning how to tie a shoe. My son, who's 4 right now, can't tie a knot, although he wants to, and I'm betting it's on the near horizon that he's going to work on that. But it's also not going to happen overnight. Like I imagine sometime over the next year he's going to start wanting to do it, and then sometime over the subsequent year he's more or less going to get it. Right? It's that kind of thing. I imagine it's going to take about a year. But how's it going to happen? Like he's going to learn how to place this one string over the other, and then keeping them in that position to fold a string through and tie it, and then he's going to double up a loop and then pull the string around and pull it through and then tighten them to make a bow. There's quite a few steps there. It's really easy to do. Now, for me, I remember very vaguely, probably somewhere around the age of 5 or 6, learning to do that, and I remember it was not that easy, and it wasn't even just at 5 or 6, and even now sometimes things can come up where it proves a little more difficult. Another thing that's kind of amazing is if I have any trouble doing that, I actually don't immediately know how to do it. If I want to know how to tie a knot, I actually have to do it myself and watch myself do it. And I have to tell my hands, slow down so that I can see the steps they go through, so that I can learn from my hands how to tie a knot. It's a crazy thing, but my hands learned that. A long time ago, they did this thing. But so what happened? Well, they tried to do it once. And this is what's going to happen with my son Theo. He's going to try to do it once, try to do it a second time, try to do it a third time, and like me with the guitar, the child knot tying or bow tying or whatever it is, somewhere around try whatever 116, it's actually going to work, right? And at a certain point, you're going to get it. And here's the thing: it's like you get stuck on that moment. It's not traumatic in that awful negative sense I was talking about, but there's a way that moment of getting it is the now you're always going to live in. Not tying, you may not see it quite as crisply there as I have in mind. So let me think of another one. That I want to bring out more the sort of obscure specificity of it. Like, why do we do this? Why do we wave at people? My son didn't do that when he was born, but he's learned how to do that now, grudgingly. When people come, he'd rather go, don't want to see them. But sometimes he waves. But not, you or I probably, I assume, do it pretty much automatically. That's a pretty arbitrary gesture. There's nothing in the nature of being that required a hand to go up and go like this to say hi, or to say those sounds, I, to say hello, right, to greet someone. But we do those things. So somehow we learned them, and we got stuck on that, such that every time a person comes up without me even thinking about it, I go, hi, or roughly. Right. So it's like I don't have any choice. And in a way, it's like time never moved on from when I learned that. That installing of that behavior in response to this thing that got installed through particular bits of practice at a particular time became a moment that I now continue to live in, right? I basically want to suggest then that every habit is a version of that. It's a way that a kind of present became not an optional thing that might pass, but became, on the contrary, from now on, the form of all your actions, right? So it wasn't a passing content of experience, it becomes the very form of your experience. And so that moment went from being a passing thing to your permanent reality. So a thing that should have drifted into the past, a moment that should have drifted into the past, is a past that remains my true present. And there again, in a sense, personal time got arrested there. And part of the idea of personal time getting arrested there is that from the time I learned that habit, I never personally attend to it again. And that's why when I tie my shoes now, some impersonal thing in me does it, in my hands. And if I personally want to know how to tie a shoe, I actually have to watch myself do it and learn from my hands how it happens. As happens, for example, if I want to try to teach my son. So the point I wanted to make here then was just that one, that the temporality, let's say, of habit, the way it relates to present and past, and in a sense future, which is that future is always going to be the same. You're always going to be stuck here with respect to this issue. Is basically the same as that of repression, right? And so I wanted to bring out that notion of impersonal time continuing to flow while personal time is arrested, and the idea of the past that remains my true present. Linking both of those to that notion that we started with before about my present as my point of view upon time. I think there's one more thing I want to say here. Just give me a second. Oh yeah, actually there may be two more things. There is something else he says about the anonymity of the body here. I think I'm going to leave that. And I think I may bring that back up again when we talk about space. So I'll just put that one on hold. That's pretty much on the next page, I think. 86 and 87. I'm gonna temporarily leave that aside because I really want just to bring out this idea about habit. And I guess the last thing I would say, just to close it up for the moment, and before moving on to space and to bring out some of the same basic stuff, is, I'm really telling the story again of the development then of a habit body. It's my habit body that ties my shoes, right? And so in my habit body, shoes are there. Shoes are part of my body, of the body that I habitually live from. Just picking up on the themes I talked about yesterday. And I guess the thing then, just to conclude, the thing I want to just say about that is that you therefore are living from a sense of time, a sense of when you are, when now is, when the past is, when the future is, right? The when of your experience, first of all, is different from the when of the objective clock. And I'll clarify that in just a second, but I also want to say, when we look at this thing that's different from the objective clock, it's also got a number of layers or levels to it, and they're different too. So, I said before, I'm going to get milk, but it's because I'm cooking dinner. It's while I'm cooking dinner. It's on a busy day, and it's on a day when I'm either breaking up with you or getting involved with you. I can't remember if I went to more layers than that, but every one of those can answer the question, when is this? When is the present? The present is when I'm on the street almost at the grocery store. The present is when I'm about to put the last ingredient in for dinner, but I discovered I didn't have any milk and I have to go get some. The answer to when is the time in that busy day when we had to stop from other work to get something to eat, but blah, 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 and et cetera, et cetera. We could say the same. And I guess when, in respect to breaking up or starting a new relationship, is the when is the day I'm actually going to tell you that, or that that you told me you don't want to see me anymore, or the day when, whatever the equivalent one would be in starting to get the first time you're coming over to my house for dinner, when we're starting a relationship or something like that. Those are different whens, and they're all now, but they're just at different levels. And every one of them is a now that has a kind of a past and future in it. And it means you're living your involvement of time in these very specific and very concrete ways. Time isn't just something measured on the clock. Time is the coming into being of our relationship, or the ending of it. Time is the coming into being of our dinner. It is the carrying out of our day, right? All those things, just getting the milk. The when always has a future that you're living from and a past that you're living from, right? That you're oriented by. So time as you live it is oriented. And it's oriented by, in a pretty loose sense, what you're trying to do. An aside, I said I was going to put off talk about the anonymity of the body. What he's going to say there is, there's a when to your body too, which has to do with the projects it's living from. But as an organism, your body has a kind of when or a kind of future built into it that's not about your personal things. So your body's going to age, it's going to grow up, it's all those sorts of things. There's a kind of organic life, the vital dimension of your existence, that has more or less the same kinds of trajectories and goals that any organism has. And so those are good. Those have a roughly analogous structure of temporality to them as well, to the one we've been saying. It's just that, as Merleau-Ponty said when he talked about the a priori of the species, they're kind of closed. They're not particularly shaped by what you as a person want. So those things are kind of an impersonal temporality that is definitive of your organism, and it's impersonal. So it's kind of an anonymous time, and it's a kind of a natural temporality that undergirds your personal history. In fact, so I've said enough of that now. That's what I was going to put off to say to the next one. So now I've added that piece too, just so you know. But let me just then get back to this last thing I was going to say. Your time is always oriented. Now is always on the way somewhere and always coming from somewhere. Where from, where to, as we get from the Platonic dialogues. Time on the clock has no orientation. It's just one more of the same, and nothing matters. But again, that's the sort of crazy thing about your birth and death. Your birth and death makes your now, which is always particular. It's always this unique time you're at. It makes it uniquely significant. And it situates it and orients it in a way that is never true of time on the clock. So that's really just the last thing that I want to say about time. So I want you to think then about that, about our lived temporality. I want you to think about that notion of the irreducible uniqueness and necessity of my present and of what now means in that context. I want you to think about the temporality of habit, which is how we develop a textured and rich concrete life. But how in that, and how that's many layered, but how in that layering of habitual temporalities, I kind of leave those things. I leave them to go on their own, right? And so the I of my most specific personal projects is itself subtended by all these habitual layers that I've kind of left behind. My personal time stopped moving forward on those fronts, and that is itself subtended by this kind of anonymous natural time of the temporality of my organism and its pursuits. I want you to think about that as the basic structure of the temporality of a life, especially with that crucial notion of orientation in it. I'm going to pause there, and then I'm going to come back and talk about space as we live it, and then we'll wrap it up with a couple of conclusions. Okay, so next we'll go on to space. Excuse me. Okay, so I want to turn to space now. I think I'm going to say almost exactly the same thing, just put the word space in place of time. That's not quite true. But my intention is actually to show you the very parallel structure that exists between Merleau-Ponty's analysis of time and his analysis of space. At least that's part of my point. Anyway, so we started off, remember, with my present. That was my point of view on time, but that when we think about it objectively, we'd make it just one now among many. But the point is that objective view really misrepresents the lived experience of the now, and moreover, it's only on the basis of that lived experience of the now that you could ever be in a position to have that objective experience. I guess I didn't really bring that point out so much. What I was bringing out with respect to time was that it was through the process of habituation that we develop for ourselves a kind of a stable world, where effectively things, we can just count on them happening. So we develop a relationship to a world where things are automatically going to happen. And in other words, that's just the way it is. And something like that, and so things that happen in that domain of habituation, things from which my personal engagement has now disengaged, become effectively third-person events. It happens that, and so on. And so Merleau-Ponty actually has a line in there. I didn't read it because I didn't think to say this at the time, but he has a line in there about habituation as something like the transformation of the first person into the third person, from I do it to it happens, basically. I should have talked about that, and something like that would be at the foundation of talking about the lived preconditions of objective experience. I'm not going to pursue that right now. I'm going to get on with the stuff about space. We'll see if we come back to that. Anyway, we were talking about the now, my present, the now that is me, the now that is the unique time that is always the case when I'm having my experience. And now listen to what he says about the here. Because this is from the chapter on spatiality of one's own body, le corps propre. Chapter 3. We're on page 102. The very bottom. When the word here is applied to my body, it does not designate a determinate position in relation to other positions or in relation to external coordinates. It designates the installation of the first coordinates, the anchoring of the active body in an object, and the situation of the body confronted with its tasks. So basically, I mean, he's saying a version of that same thing. Just as we said, now, in its sense of being the original context of any happening of experience for me, just as he said that about now, he's saying that about here, right? Here is not one position in relation to others, which is how we think of it when we adopt the objective standpoint. But it designates the installation of the first coordinates. It's the origination of our engagement with space. I won't belabor that, but I'll just say one little thing about it. Again, if you think of yourself as here, you're always here, just like you're always now. And that sense of being always here, you can recognize to be that same thing that he talked about in the chapter on the experience of the body in classical psychology, when he talked about the invariant character of the minimal visual presence of your body and so on. I compared the now to that, and this I can compare to that even more strongly, because that's the spatial here, right? That's where you are. You're sort of tied into this body looking out. Interesting parallel, right? If you remember, this is a digression, but it's one I think you might find worth thinking about. Surely you're familiar with the story of the cave in Plato's Republic, where he talks about the prisoners being tied, always facing forward, and so on. There's a pretty significant. There's tons to say about that image, obviously. This is a small point. There's the image, in a way, in addition to all the things you're used to thinking about, in a certain way characterizes our relationship to the body, right? That you're always locked into that position of looking forward with this sort of massive blind spot behind you that in a way represents the whole of the process of subjectivity. So in a way, the cave image it in part can be an image just of the fact of embodiment. But that's neither here nor there. I just the way I was describing that remark from the classical psychology chapter just reminded me of that. Anyway, so the here has that same structure of necessity and invariability and permanence, such that it is always where you are. You're always here, right? That it again is not just one place among many. It's the place with respect to which everything else gets a location. So when you say everything else is there, wherever you define it, it's defined with respect to you. You are in a way that with respect to which everything else gets its position. It's to your left, to your right, above you, below you, and so on. I can't remember if he says this in the later chapter on space. He definitely says this, though, in the later chapter on time, on temporality, in the part 3 of the section of the book on being for self and being in the world. Chapter 2 of part 3 is called Temporality, and there he makes the claim anyway, that to even talk about time is to talk about something that changes with respect to a point of view, and therefore it really makes no sense to talk about time outside of the context of experience. I'm not going to go in and study that. You might want to go ahead and study that, but this thing I was just saying about the here as being the point with respect to which there is an above, a below, a to the left, to the right, and so on, is kind of a similar point, right? In other words, Space is always, whenever we think of space, we think of it in a kind of a comparative way, this in relation to that. But there is no in relation to except for someone, right? And so that's basically the main point. And then for you, the here defines a fundamental orientation, right? So things are to the left or to the right of you. I'm going to say a little bit more about orientation in a moment, but I talked about the time being oriented. There, the relevant orientation, I guess, was coming from the projects and so on that are intrinsic to your experience of now. And here, this orientation is coming from the capacities for this basic orientation of left, right, above, below, front, in front, behind. It's coming from your basic capacities, I guess, to move as a body. Like those are the ways you can move, and even within your own body. If you think of Aristotle's Progression of Animals, he talks about the very nature of a moving body is that it effectively holds a part of itself fixed so that it can move around it, and that's what that ability to oppose itself to itself intrinsically is the condition of movement. That's where right and left come from, and so on. But if you think of the kind of analysis Aristotle gives of movement, you can see that in the very nature of movement is oriented. It's got this or spatial organization and directedness built into it. So anyway, I just want you to think about that. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second, but only just to think about that idea that your initial engagement of space is the inauguration of a fundamental orientation that is that which allows there to be places in relationship to other places, right, in your experience. Anyway, that's just that one sentence about the here as applied to my body does not designate a determinate position in relation to other positions, but rather the installation of the first coordinates. So I'd like you to think about that in relationship to the original now. Okay, now, what's the next thing he says? Right in the very next sentence. Now, bodily space can be distinguished from external space, and it can envelop its parts rather than laying them out side by side. Blah blah blah. I just wanted to bring that one sentence up. So when you think about the space of things outside you, there's that place over there, there's that place over there, that place over there, and so on. But your body has a kind of space too, right? So your here is where you are, but that here is not a point. That here is distributed spatially, right? The here that is your body is the one and the same spatial reality of a hand over here, a shoulder over here, eyes over here, ears over here, right? The you, if your body is where you are all those things, right? So your very you is spatial. I quickly made the same point about time when I said that time is not, I didn't use this exact sentence. I used the word duration. I didn't use the word instant, as I recall. But time isn't just an instant. Time is, the now endures, like the now is a day or whatever. So when you are is kind of stretched out over time. Where you are is stretched out through space, right? So both temporally and spatially, you occupy something more than a moment. You inhabit a body. You occupy a duration, and there is no now or here that isn't like that. If we went back to Hegel and read his chapter on sense certainty, we could actually. He's got tons of interesting stuff in there that would allow us to explore a little bit about why and how to talk about that further. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm hoping you can just think that through enough on your own to get the basic point. But let's go back to the here that is my body. So one and the same you is here in the body. That means you grab. This is how you pick something up. This is how you chew. Plop, plop, plop on the ground is how you run. This is how you shield yourself. This is your back. This is how you lean against the chair. Like in all of those things, it's you. And the very way of enacting yourself as a subject engaging with the world is in and as this concrete, determinate, extended spatial reality, this body. But it's not like you're here in some point behind your, whatever this thing is called, between your eyes. And then but you think, oh, I need to move my hand, so you have to hire some little messenger to run out to the hand and make it move or anything like that, right? No, on the contrary, if somebody pokes you with a needle, it hurts you, and you feel the pain, but you don't feel the pain here, you feel the pain here, right? If someone caresses you, your shoulder or your neck, you are the one who's caressed. You feel it, but you feel it here, right? Which means you, as a sensing being, are at the extent of your body everywhere, at the extremities of your body. You're at the skin, right? You're all over it. You're not. That's not so true internally, right? You don't. Lots of things you don't feel inside you. So really, it's this, whatever, I don't know that much about the physiology of skin, but it's this sort of tactile surface, and the surface that's alive to temperature and all the rest. It's roughness and smoothness. It's that surface that you inhabit quite pervasively. Right, and you recall that remark Merleau-Ponty made about embodiment. He said, if you're blind and you get used to using a cane, you become habituated to using it, and you become habituated to the coupling of your body and the cane, with the result that the cane becomes incorporated into your body. Phenomenologically speaking, it is your body, because you feel things at the end of the cane. And somebody says, oh, you don't really feel things at the end of the cane. That must be you interpreting things and so on. That's somebody else's attempt to construct a theory of what must be happening. But if you talk to people in those situations, and probably you have different kinds of experiences like that yourself, as a description of the form your lived experience takes, you actually feel at the end of the cane, just like you feel at the tip of your finger. Right? So I'm trying to get you the sense that you are all through that, and picking up on that point I made before, that you take up space, right? You are spatial in your very being, you're bodily in that sense. But now I want to think about the spatiality of that body a bit more, because this is the line he says, bodily space can be distinguished from external space because it can envelop its parts. That means one is inside the other, one isn't outside the other. So this cup here is outside this book here, they're just outside each other. They're two different things in two different spaces. But in an important way, the here of my hand is not external to the here of my forehead, which means when I'm sweaty, I go like this. Like if I feel, because it's a hot day today, if I feel perspiration on my forehead, without even thinking about it, my hand will go there to wipe it away. Or if a mosquito stings me, I think that's the example he uses, I'll go there right away without even thinking about it. So the interesting thing is, my hand knows where my shoulder is. My hand knows where my forehead is. It's intrinsic to the very meaning of the hand. Or where the hand is intrinsic to the very meaning of the shoulder. Where the shoulder is intrinsic to the very meaning of the hand. They're sort of moments of the same space. The where of each is enveloped in the where of the other, which is another way of saying you inhabit that whole. So it's you here and you here, so you connect yourself to yourself. That notion of bodily space, that's what Merleau-Ponty refers to. And of course, I should have found the page. He refers to that as situational space as opposed to positional space. And I'm embarrassed that it didn't occur to me to find the page where he says that, but I'll look for a second. If I don't find it, I'll find it later. Yeah, whatever. Okay, but so the body, in other words, as you live it, the where of your body is not just a set of indifferent positions. Right, your hand is situated with respect to your shoulder and your forehead and whatever else. You could say all kinds of things about all the different parts of your body. They share a situation. And so Merleau-Ponty uses that lived way you inhabit your body such that you are everywhere in it. And in that sense, you know where the other parts are, and each part knows where the other parts are. He refers to that as a situational experience of space, which he contrasts to the positional one, which is the idea that a thing is just in a position that you could mark on a grid, but each position is just discrete and different and according to some universal framework, right? So the difference then is that in situational space, there's a space you inhabit, whereas positional space is space. It's just objective space that's completely alien to you. So it's a compelling and straightforward phenomenological description to describe your body that way. What's interesting is that we develop that relationship of situational space with things that we normally would think of as outside our body. So I already gave an example of that, right? When the blind person incorporates into his or her their living body, their phenomenal body, the cane, the here of that person has changed its shape and become a bit bigger, right? I said that your who has a where, right? You're spatially distributed. Well, the spatiality that is your living body has grown and developed, and the spatiality of your own body now includes this thing that used to be a part of the external world, but through habituation, it's at the lived level become a part of your body. It's become a part of your body as you live it. So your situational spatiality, the space you can live in such that you are immediately there, even when you're here, right, has now taken over a piece of what used to be the external world. The formerly alien has become the familiar, and you now inhabit it. You've come to be at home in the cane. And of course, that happens also then with places. You come to be at home. Like last night, my son wanted to sleep in the big bed. So he went to sleep at 8:30, and I didn't want to go to sleep at 8:30, so I was up for a while, and I think I made too much noise. And he woke up about 11:30, and he was in the big bed by himself. I wasn't there, and so he, cried a little bit and got out of bed and came looking for me, and I got him. And then he was fine. And I said, okay, well, let's lie down again. And I would have gone to bed with him, but he was a little uncomfortable. I said, well, would you rather go to your bed? And he said, yeah, take me to my bed. So I took him to his bed, and he was calm, and he went to sleep right away. And I also know from, many past experiences, if he had woken up there in his bed at night, he would have been okay. So the thing is, but the point of that story is, it seems to me that for him, he's at home in his bedroom where he's lived, almost every day of his life. He's gone on visits here and there, but he was born in that room, and he's slept in that room basically every day when he's been at home. So for him, that room just is where it is, where it's at. It's his room. It's his place. And when he enters that room, I think he feels like he really feels like it's his. It's like it's part of him, and consequently, he is very attuned to violations of the boundaries there. Like, of course, he knows I'm going to go in there with him, and he wants me to, and I do other things in there. But if I were just to decide that, I think I want to sleep on your bed, he would get mad because he'd say, no, it's my bed. Of course, that's a matter of a sense of just property in general. But property, I think, is we should do a phenomenology of property. I tried to do a bit of that a long time ago in a book called Bearing Witness to Epiphany. But in any case, you'd have to think phenomenologically about what it is for a growing child to have property. And it seems to me that's integral. I mean, this was the point I was trying to make in Bearing Witness to Epiphany. That's integral to that person's development of experiences of autonomy, and the I guess the point I want to make here is, just as we would commonly recognize that the boundaries of a person's organic body need to be respected, and we can think of ways that would violate that, and we think, oh, you shouldn't do that. Well, those boundaries of a child's body don't stop at the organic, right? There are boundaries to the child's lived body, that lived space it inhabits, that it is coupled with and is at home in. Those things need to be respected too, which is why it's not okay for me to treat his room as if it were my own. So I'm allowed to go in there, and that's part of what we do. Is I'm more than allowed to go in there. I have to go in there. It's part of my job that he desires and recognizes. It's a place where we're together when I put him to bed, but it's not mine to use as if it were mine. So I used my son Theo as an example there, to try to bring out that sense that our places can become part of the spatiality that is our subjectivity, the space that is our subjectivity, just as the cane can. And moving a step up from the bedroom and the child, like for any of us, typically the house that we make our home is like that. Like, so I would generally just want to say our home, and kind of mean by that a house, but not everybody lives in a house. But I think pretty much anybody who isn't either psychologically almost destroyed or in some other very exceptional situation, pretty much everybody has a home. Might not be a good one, but it seems to me a crucial part of being a functioning subject in the world is that you have a sense of a place where you can be home. My friend Kirsten Jacobson has written some, quite nice articles about agoraphobia, which we people think that's, fear of open spaces, fear of the market, fear of being out. We take that to be kind of a fear of space. But her argument, which I find quite compelling, is that it's really the experience of not having a home. It's finding that your participation in the spatial world, in space, is always one of alienation, one where you can never have a secure place that you can rest against to develop a comfortable relationship with what's outside you, and so on. So there you have an example of someone, the agoraphobic, someone without some significant sense of home in the spatial world, is someone for whom space becomes unmanageable, becomes overwhelmingly alien and threatening. So we should reflect on that further. That's a great point, and you could look at a couple of Kirsten Jacobson's articles if you want to. One is agoraphobia and hypochondria as disorders of dwelling. That's a very old one. She wrote when she was just beginning as a scholar, but it makes some pretty good points. A more recent one is called Embodied Domestics and Embodied Politics, which again is about experiences of agoraphobia. And it looks at it from a somewhat different angle, but brings out similar points. Those are good ones to look at for that issue if you want. But anyway, the point I wanted to make, and you can go back to the family house now if you want, or the private apartment or whatever. For most of us, there's a significant way that we will have an experience of home in a thing that is, recognizable as a dwelling. Obviously, the people on the street who we call homeless, who we probably should call houseless, and some of them may be homeless, but lots of them I think have homes, just not houses, and they may not be very safe or nice homes, but I think they have homes on the street. But for many of us have our homes in recognizable dwellings, houses and apartments and so on. And so I want you to think about that. Assuming you're one of those people, I'd like you to think about what it's like to be at home. And when you're at home in that place, you come back to it from working out in the world, sort of alien world out there. You come back and you rest. It's where you sleep. It's where you eat. It's where you come together with your loved ones. It's where you bring in guests. It's your place. It's a place that is dedicated to you. It belongs to you, and in a way, you belong to it. Like that's when you're in that place, you're secure. You're in your place. You're where you should be. And so, we don't relate generally to the space of our house, or the space of our home, as something alien. We relate to it as something comfortable and familiar, something supportive rather than something challenging. and it seems to me that relationship of the hand hitting the mosquito, or scratching where the perspiration runs down my cheek there, very similar things characterize how you relate to the places, like the locations in your house, the way you flop down on the couch, the way you go to the kitchen when you're hungry, unreflectively. I don't even know what's in your house, but I guess you could think about that. You could think about the spaces you're familiar with, where those spaces are defined by aspects of your living process. So the way you conduct your existence of yourself relies on those places as the almost like the organs you use for grasping, for speaking. Your chairs, certain rooms, certain windows, certain setups you use to embody various fundamental functions of your living, and you're living at that basic level of kind of comfortable and secure maintenance of your sense of a stable identity. Your identity as someone who can engage with and face the world. And then beyond. Well, actually, let me say one more thing about that, and then I'll make a further point. So, you're probably very familiar with your home, and you're probably also familiar with your office or wherever you work. You may be familiar with some stores you like to go to. You may be familiar with some routes, up the street and so on. Your friend's house in another city, your parents' house, your children's house, your grandmother's house, your boyfriend's house, whatever it is. Excuse me. What's interesting then is that Heidegger, when he talks about this, uses the language of proximity and distance, right? How close you are. Like, you feel close to your house. You feel close to your girlfriend's house. You feel close to your neighborhood grocery store. You feel close to maybe even your familiar route up the street. Those things are close in a kind of qualitative sense. They're close in the sense of experiences of intimacy. You feel intimately connected with them, and they feel close to who you are, and you feel therefore comfortable with them, and you rely on them. What's interesting, though, is that on a grid, on a positional grid, a grid of spatial positions, each one of which is indifferently the same as every other one, like your familiar map or a Cartesian coordinate system, the places you feel closest to can be mathematically very far apart, qualitatively close, quantitatively very distant. And the flip side of that, places that are quantitatively very close to you, like the neighbor's house, or maybe even the house one more removed from the neighbor, can qualitatively be infinitely far from you. Like, it is kind of funny. Like, where I live, I kind of know my neighbor immediately to one side, and I kind of know my neighbor immediately to the other side. And if you asked me who lived in the house one more down from either of those, I actually couldn't tell you. I'm sure I've seen the people lots of times, but those houses are kind of mysterious to me. And I have a kind of limited sense of comfort with respect to each of my neighbors' houses, because I do kind of know the people, and I see their yards all the time, and I talk to them. The next one house down, like, it's only 15 feet farther, or whatever far it is, but feels a lot farther. I would walk into either of my neighbor's yard if my son threw his ball in there, and I feel a little uncomfortable violating their property lines. I think, I shouldn't really be going into somebody else's yard, but I would also feel comfortable enough doing it, comfortable in the sense that I know it's okay, and I wouldn't feel uptight while I was doing it, although I'd try to do it pretty quickly. But I don't know what I'd do if it went into the yard one further down. Like, I would feel like I feel like I'm trespassing. If I go to get something out of the house of either one of my immediate neighbors, I feel like I'm doing something I'm allowed to do. Like they don't really want me to do that. They don't really want my son throwing his stuff in their yard. Um, but uh, but 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 it's an acceptable action. It's not trespassing. It's a necessary evil, so to speak. But if I went into the houses one more down, like I would feel like I was trespassing, and I would kind of expect them to feel that way. Now you could say, well, that's of course, your neighbors know you and they don't. Yeah, that's of course that's why. So I'm habituated to certain relationships there. But the point is I'm not interested in a theory of why it happens. I'm interested in the lived sense of my spatial experience. And there's there is a radical difference in how I live my relationship to the space, uh, 10 feet away and the space 30 feet away there. And the funny thing is, my neighbor Blake, well, not my neighbor, my friend Blake, who lives 3 or 4 houses down, person whom I happen to know, a drummer I've played music with sometimes, a nice guy, also runs a local store that I shop at sometimes, we're reasonably good friends. Um, uh, he gave me a couch, nice guy. Um, uh, I feel close to his yard, and I'd be happy to go in there. And so the funny thing is, like experientially, my block has a few things on it that are kind of the highlights to me, and I feel very close to all of them. And the thing is, when I'm walking up and down the street, I feel like I'm around those places all the time, and I I basically never notice any of the other houses. I never notice anything that's there. I couldn't tell you what those houses even look like to a large extent. And so if I were suddenly confronted with them, then I would be kind of freaked out. I don't want to overplay it, but my point is just that that the living relationship to space still has proximities and closenesses and distances. But the experience of closeness is not like the mathematical calculation of numerical distance. Um, Qualitative experience of closeness is an experience of intimacy. An experience of distance is an experience of alienation. Or just complete alienation, not necessarily in the active sense of having been alienated, but just in the sense that it's alien. It's completely other to you. You got no relationship to it. Um, and so I am at home in certain spaces and therefore very close to them, and I am alien to all these other ones, even though those other ones quantitatively are right very close to me in a mathematical sense, and the other ones I'm experientially close to are mathematically very far apart. And so but it's not like experientially I have a mathematical grid and then I just sort of plot out the places I want to go to. It's not like that. It's that the very way I inhabit the spatial world is with these intimate closenesses as my points of reference. Like I, in a living sense, that's where I operate from. The where that is my world, is oriented by those things. Those are all at the center. And so, like, if you could draw a map of the space of my neighborhood as I live it, it would be a map of my emotional life, roughly, and all these things would be at the heart of it that are, in fact, geographically all over the place. And these other things that are right beside me would be stretched out in the, very distant thing, right? So it would be interesting to try to draw a map, and I'm sure there are artists who have done it. I mean, not even artists. I'm sure there are psychologists who've tried to do it. But it would be interesting to think about how to visually portray that lived experience of space and the radically different way the coordinates and the orientation of space appear compared to a Cartesian grid. And the thing about a Cartesian grid is it doesn't really have orientation. It has a distribution, but it's not going anywhere, right? It doesn't have any sense. There is no direction to a grid. It's just indifferent space. But the space I live is directed. Like it's always it's always in terms of here and there, from here to there, and from there back to here. And the here that began as when he said the here as applied to my body does not designate a determinate position, but rather the installation of the first coordinates. The here that began as my body, and that we started to expand into we started to see is the hand and the shoulders and so on, and then it grew into the cane and to the child's bedroom and so on. The here that is me, that is the spatial reality that I am, right, is the one that here is my home and all of its subordinate components, my girlfriend's house, my mom's house, my best friend's house, the grocery store, the places I feel close, right? That's my here, and it's not a theoretical construction. I live from that as the here. And so, yeah, my house and my sister's house or whatever on the map, on the city map, are 10 blocks apart. But in my living experience, they're like my hand and my shoulder, right? Those are the two spatially differentiated moments of a single living space, such that those parts envelop each other, right? So you need to think then of your inhabitation of what we would normally think of as external space, but which is no longer external because you've come to inhabit it. You need to think of that on the model of the spatiality of the body, what Merleau-Ponty calls a situational space, rather than a positional space. And then I guess I want to make one more point, and I guess it picks up on that last thing I was trying to say when I was trying to say this is not a theoretical thing. He has an extended discussion here of Schneider, the brain damaged patient. And he comes up a lot in the book, so Schneider is an interesting guy because got a piece of shrapnel in the brain. I can't remember. I used to know the story. I can't remember it in detail now, but the damage he's suffered has resulted in some surprising developments in his experience that in a way lead us to see him acting in ways that we might not expect, that we would not expect if we relied upon a lot of the familiar theories we have for what a mind is and what a body is and so on. So his analysis, Merleau-Ponty's analysis, is much the same in its structure and style in this chapter as it was in the chapter on the phantom limb. Like he's opposing a kind of, he's looking at two sides of a dualistic conception, a kind of the side that distinguishes mind from body and tries to explain things in terms of the mind, and the side that distinguishes mind from body and tries to explain things in terms of the body. And just as that didn't work with the phantom limb, it's not going to work with any of the maladies, strange phenomena that Schneider's situation reveals. And that's going to show us the untenability of that dualistic conception for understanding our experience, and then we can apply that to our own things, which are not like Schneider's. Like we don't have the same problems that he does, but the same interpretive principles will apply to our own situation. Anyway, the relevant thing that I want to talk about Schneider is just one point. He talks about the interesting situation that in certain crucial cases, Schneider can grasp a part of his body, but he can't point to it. So basically. The investigator will ask him, point to your nose, and he can't. He doesn't know how to, right? And so you would say, he doesn't know where his nose is. But if he has a runny nose, he'll grab a handkerchief and he can blow his nose right away. Like so, in that sense, he does know where his nose is, right? And so Merleau-Ponty analyzes those things, and he picks up the language of abstract and concrete movement. Abstract movement meaning a movement you're called upon to do that's abstracted from any practically meaningful context. So just pointing at your nose, it's got nothing to do with any living activity. It's abstracting the activity of pointing from any of the living contexts in which it would normally function. When you see something really interesting and you're with someone, you say, "Look at that." That's the example Merleau-Ponty uses in one of his chapters. But I can't remember which one it is. It might be the Cogito chapter. I'm not sure. It's one of the later ones. But he uses that example of someone pointing, and that is a way that pointing really happens in the world. Or you might say, "Look at this spot on my hand or my arm." I don't know. Would you point? Maybe, but maybe you would point. So look at this spot on my arm, right? There are situations where you would do that. So pointing does have a practical function for sure, But when someone just says to you, okay, now point to your nose, it's not operating. Pointing as such is not operating out of any practical function. You're obeying instructions, so you are engaged in a practice, but there's no intrinsic connection between pointing and obeying instructions. Like, you're just doing this completely abstract activity. And the thing about Schneider is, it seems like he can't do that. He can't point to parts of his own body in those abstract contexts. And so, just to repeat what I said before, that would make it seem like he doesn't know where his nose is. But then when he has to blow his nose, he can. So he can grab his nose and blow on it, because he's now engaging with his body in terms of a meaningful bodily task. And in that sense, you can see he doesn't know where his nose is. So what that shows you is knowing where is an equivocal expression. It could, probably both the terms of it, knowing and where, are equivalent. There are different senses of knowing, and there are different senses of where. So in the case of pointing to his nose, he's being asked theoretically and cognitively, objectively, to recognize a positional where. And it turns out he can't cognitively recognize an objective position and translate that into an artificial gesture of moving his hand. But practically, he can recognize a situational where, and his hand knows where his nose is, and he can blow his nose. So there are two different kinds of where there. There's a positional where and a situational where. And there are two different kinds of knowing there. There's a reflective, a deliberate reflective cognition, and there is a non-reflective behavior, practical activity. And so the relevant thing that shows us, what it shows us is that, Schneider can't manage that really that theoretical cognition of positional space, not in the way you or I presumably can do so very easily. He can't do that, but he can practically navigate concrete situational space pretty effectively. He has some problems there too, but generally he's pretty good. And Merleau-Ponty talks about not just his grabbing his hand, it's also he can make his way through the neighborhood if he has an appointment to go to, and various other things he can do. Now the point here isn't so much to go on to analyze Schneider, just like we weren't particularly going to go on to analyze the phantom limb. The phantom limb was important because it pulled two things apart that are usually together and allowed us to see the difference of them. What it pulled apart were the body at this moment, or the actual body from the habitual body, using the language of Don's translation. It pulled apart the actual body and the habitual body. And these two things, which are usually in sync in our lives, are out of sync in the phantom limb. Well, similarly, for us, blowing your nose and pointing your nose, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Like, you wouldn't even notice, right? So for us, our theoretical relationship to abstract positional space is in sync with, tightly integrated with, our behavioral engagement with concrete situational space. But in Schneider, those two have pulled apart. He can't do the one, but he can do the other. And so his malady allows us to see the difference between them. Okay, now the point of that, to bring it back to what I was saying before, is that is just that thing I just said, that Schneider's knowledge of situational space is not a reflective theoretical cognition. It is a non-reflective recognition at the level of the body, right? As Merleau-Ponty says at the end of this chapter, I just opened it to the right page, in talking about something slightly different, but the point is the same. On page 145, about 10 lines down, he's talking about habit, and he says, it's a question of a knowledge in our hands, right? That Schneider's knowledge is in his body as an intelligent reality. What did he call it before? Organic thought. And I talked about that notion of intelligence in the body last time, I think. Well, Schneider's knowledge of space is a bodily knowledge. It's the knowledge of his intelligent moving body in its ability to relate to its lived body, which means both, the parts of his organism that envelop each other with their spatiality. But it is also more than that, as Merleau-Ponty documents when he says things like, Schneider can get around the neighborhood when he has an appointment, he knows where he's going, and so on. So Schneider has incorporated more space into his body too. And I imagine the same thing would be true of his couch. Like, probably he can get on the couch when he needs to sit down and watch TV, but maybe I'm making this up, but I'm making up a type of thing. If someone said, can you tell me where your couch is? He might be stymied, I don't know if that's actually true of Schneider, but it is a similar kind of structure. And one more thing I would say there. I guess that point about bodily recognition, and it relates to something we said last time too about the body, right? When Schneider blows his nose, when the investigator says point your nose, like they're calling for a very deliberate action where you generate a plan out of your head and you sort of send it to your hand and say, do this. Right? That's not what responding to things in situational space is like. There, the feeling in his nose summons his hand, right? So the reactions are at the level of being summoned by the spatial demands of the situation. So movement in that context is much more a response to environmental pressures and environmental cues than it is the deliberate imposition of a reflectively developed plan on a surface. I definitely talked about something similar to that last time when we were talking about the phantom limb, when I was talking about the bodily recognition of a practical demand or something like that, from somewhere around page 82 or 83. That's a quotation from somewhere around 82 or 83 of the phantom limb chapter. But anyway, the point I was trying to make last time and here quickly is that action in this context of dealing with lived space is at the level of something more like call and response, where the call typically comes from the situation. You respond to what the situation calls for, rather than being the deliberate imposition of an independently defined idea or project upon an alien situation. And so what I'm trying to get at there then is that our living inhabitation of our situational space is by and large a non-reflective bodily responsiveness to the tensions within really this great big body that has over which my subjectivity is within which my subjectivity is distributed. And so the point now is I'm going to make is basically the same as the point about the habit body, and that is that our lived experience of space is this dynamic and rich thing that we're engaged in, but by and large, this massive dimension of our experience that is giving us the comfortable world we inhabit that lets us engage in our little reflective lives as egos with our little plans and goals and so on. That thing is huge, but it's under the surface of our cognition. So the thing we were saying about the habit body, we can say about lived space in general. And that world of lived space is really the same as that world of lived time, right? The world of lived space is the relationships to the world that we've developed that are that have made for us sort of the relevant body to live out the projects that define our lives, right? And so I was, in the earlier part of this lecture, I was talking about the various layers or levels of our lived temporality, from the anonymity of natural time through these really basic to progressively more refined levels of our habituation, but all of which remain as habits, things that are outside the domain of personal explicit reflection, right? So our personal ego is this little thing at the top of this massive thing that carries on by itself for us and lets us have the world we live in. And that the time and space are just two different parameters for articulating that same thing, right? Those temporal projects are the life of this body, this spatially distributed being, this inhabitation is this life, right? And so, so really, I mean, I guess I've basically made pretty much all the points I want to make. I'll say a little thing to sum it up, but that's really what I wanted to go through. I wanted to go through a little bit of the discussion of lived space and lived time to help give you a sense of what they are in relationship to Merleau-Ponty's text. Basically in chapter 1 of part 1 on the body as object and mechanistic physiology, and then chapter 3 on the spatiality of one's own body, le corps propre. And I wanted to bring out those ideas to show the parallel of the issues of lived time and lived space, and to talk about them in such a way that you can see that they're really ways of talking about the same thing as well. And then especially, and to see then, that's also, again, basically the same story as the story of the habitual body and the actual body, right? This is the habitual me and versus the me at this moment, so to speak, I at this moment. Or I guess it's really the difference between the I and the what you might call the self, which is sort of your I, but these are things that in a certain way you can't avow, because they're things you've let your personal ego come out of them, so they just happen now as third person processes, third person processes of inhabitation and temporalizing and so on, that you in a significant way undergo rather than do. These are largely passive dimensions of in a sense of your activity. It's of how you as a self are doing things, but you don't experience them as deliberate doings. I said at the very beginning, I talked about action. I said I was going to use that word in a kind of a loose sense. And the point is here I want to say, well, if by action we really mean deliberate, chosen paths of self-directed behavior in the world, then in a real way, lots of what we're talking about is not exactly action, because it's something that is more a matter of undergoing. But it's still you. It's something that comes from how you have enacted your perspective in the world. You are the source it's coming from, and so on. So these are kinds of dimensions of your action, in quotation marks, that you can't exactly avow because they're not ego acts. They're not acts of you as an ego. And so what the phenomenology then is revealing to us is this, what I've just been saying, as kind of the structure of who you are. And it really should show you a lot of things, but one thing it should show you is the pretty extreme limits of the relevance of the ego's self-interpretation for the understanding of who you are. And it explains why psychoanalysis is such a powerful and meaningful thing. Psychoanalysis operates in slightly different terms, but that's kind of what it's analyzing when it analyzes the unconscious, and when it distinguishes the ego from all that other stuff that's going on in you, right? And so in that sense, psychoanalysis is right on, right? It has captured this structure that we're talking about, right? In fact, it's funny. I was thinking about a psychoanalyst, Donald Winnicott, when I was talking about Kirsten Jacobson and not having a sense of home and being excessively exposed to the threatening indifference of the world, because he talks about Winnicott talks, as do lots of people, but Winnicott quite powerfully talks about that in the context of talking about a child growing up, that children need to be sort of introduced gradually into the challenging dimensions of the world, and it's by having a secure sense of home developed that they're able to have a strong sense of the ability to engage with things outside. But if you just throw little children out into the cold, they don't get strong, they get weak, they get destroyed, right? It's by allowing people to develop a secure base in the world that they become able to strongly engage the larger world. That's not directly relevant to the thing I was saying, but it's just a reminder of the stuff I was saying before, and a example of some really great psychoanalytic writing that picks up on exactly these kinds of themes. Anyway, so I hope that the thing that this has done, in addition to introducing the themes of lived space and lived time, is helped to give you a much richer sense of what is involved in your action, in your living in the world, and especially drawing attention to these massive dimensions of non-reflective engagement and inhabitation that underlie that little world of the ego that thinks of itself as a self-contained subjective choosing power facing an independent alien objective world. So let's leave it there for now, and then we're going to move on now to what I think is probably going to be the last topic. I still have one more maybe up my sleeve, but I haven't decided if I want to do that or not. But so what I think is probably going to be our last topic, that will still take a little while, which is now Merleau-Ponty talking about our relationships with other people, and that's what we'll come back to next time.